As Crystal Bridges in the Momentary, we recognize our role as settlers and guests in the Northwest Arkansas region. We acknowledge the Caddo, Quapaw, and Osage, as well as the many indigenous caretakers of this land and water. We appreciate the enduring influence of the vibrant, diverse, and contemporary cultures of indigenous peoples. We are conscious of the role in colonization that museums have played. As cultural institutions, we have a responsibility to engage in the dismantling of historical and systemic invisibility of Indigenous peoples past, present, and future. We choose to intentionally hold ourselves accountable to appropriate conversation, representation, connection, and education to facilitate a space of measurable change.
Hi, yeah, it's great to see you again. And
And everyone out there, thank
yeah,
you.
thanks for coming out. I guess I'll start. I mean, my identity was always kind of it was kind of mixed. It would switch back and forth, you know, like if I was around people that were Asian or Chinese, then I'd be Chinese. And if I was around non-Asians, then I'd be American. The problem came would be like when we would mix our groups together, and and I wouldn't know, like, am I the Chinese guy, or am I the Chinese American guy, or am I just the American guy? So I think throughout my entire life it's always been like, um who am I and when am I that? I think after we took this journey and learned more about my family's history, which took us not to China. You know, when we went to search for my family roots, we didn't end up in China to find my family roots. We ended up in Mississippi. And I think when that happened, it really kind of started off because I wanted my daughter to know, because I never knew about my family history. So we figured if we're going to do our family roots, we should do it after, you know, once my daughter was born. We should try to figure it out. And I think after learning this great history of our family and the many thousands of families that have been in this country for so long, and specifically in that region, I found that it's okay to be all of the above. You know, you can be American, you can be Chinese American, you can be Chinese and be proud of your ethnicity and your traditions and your cultural backgrounds. It's okay to be all of the above in this country. And what I learned was that most people in this country um, already feel like they can. It's just for some reason, being Asian American, you feel like you have to choose. But you know, for someone that's Italian, it's okay to be Italian and American. For someone that's black, you know, it's good. It's okay to be African and African American, African American and American. But for some reason, being Asian, you know, all my life I felt like I had to choose, and now I realize I don't have to choose. I can be all of the above.
Yeah, and for me, I grew up in a initially a predominantly white neighborhood, and so I grew up wanting to be blonde hair and blue eyed. When I was a little girl, I used to love watching movie musicals, and I remember Grace was my favorite musical, and I wanted to be Sandy. And at that time, you know, that version was played by Olivia Newton-John, and she was blonde, and I wanted to be that. And then the popular girls at school were blonde. Everybody I saw on TV was, you know, white, not necessarily always blonde, but just they didn't look like me. And so I always kind of felt a little bit of an inferiority complex growing up being Asian, because that wasn't what was the popular thing. And so I grew up most of my life wrestling with those identity issues, wanting to be more American than maybe more Chinese. And certainly I didn't feel American enough being here. And when I went to Asia to go visit my cousins and my relatives, like I wasn't American enough. And
Or
so I
Chinese enough.
definitely sorry, I wasn't Chinese enough, being the American. And so I definitely wrestled with that identity. And so I think for me, that's how I ended up framing a lot of the film, is because also growing up and learning about American history, you know, we didn't learn about ourselves except for maybe railroad workers and Japanese internment during World War II.
If you
But
got that.
yeah, in our history books, like that's pretty much like the two little footnotes that we get. And so I felt no connection to American history and the main narrative. And so I didn't see myself as American, until I walked into a museum in Mississippi and discovered that there were Chinese people in the South. And in my eyes, you can't get more American than the American South. And I realized there was a bigger story here. And then learning about Baldwin's family's lineage here, I'm the first one in my country, in my family, born here in the United States. And so again, I always perceive myself as an immigrant, even though I was born here, my parents were immigrants. And so we really wanted to reframe that for the audience with our film, and just even our conversations, and hopefully people that are listening here can get a better insight into kind of the struggle with American identity that Asians have in this country.
Absolutely. And I think that Baldwin and Larissa, what you were both speaking about on the issue of belonging, and on the issue of, for example, how is our understanding of identity and history intertwined, and what are the institutional discourses, from schooling, from our AP history courses, what are the pieces of information and knowledge that are passed down to us? And as you were mentioning, both Baldwin and Larissa, a lot of that sometimes in a semester might only take up one class session, if at all. And so I guess my next question also really touches upon one of the opening lines in the film, which is, as an Asian American, I think most people can attest to having been asked, "Where are you from?" And then you say, "California." No, really, where are you really from? And so this idea of belonging and squishing somebody's identity into a geography or perceived ethnicity is highly problematic. And of course, it brings up this issue of the perpetual foreigner, which we've also touched upon. And so my next question is, what do you feel ultimately confirms membership as an American, both from a personal perspective and perhaps perceived from outsiders' views?
You want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
I'll I mean, ladies, I'll let you go there first. I took over last time, so go ahead. I have an idea, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, first off, to kind of explain the whole perpetual foreigner and the kind of implicit bias that we have in our society, I'll explain it this way. If you look at someone who's Asian, and I have to admit, I've done it too as an Asian American. I've looked at somebody with an Asian face in this country and maybe assumed that they would speak with an Asian accent, like that they weren't originally from here. Like that's our first inclination. If you look like somebody that looks like us, Asian, you would think, oh, they must not be born here. They must be from overseas. They must speak a foreign language too. But if you look at somebody who's Caucasian, you don't automatically look at them and go like, they must be from France or they must be from Russia. You just don't think that. Or even if you look at somebody who is of African descent, you don't automatically go like, oh, they're Black. They must be from Senegal or from Ghana. Like you just think if you're in America, like those two groups generally are quote unquote American. And I would say the Latinx community has this issue too, that a lot of people think like, oh, they must not be from here, even though there's obviously a lot of people with Hispanic and Latinx roots who have been in this country for generations, just like a lot of Asian Americans.
Or even if you look white and you're Latinx, but your last name is like Hernandez or something, right? Then they'll all automatically switch. Oh, you're probably not from here either.
Right. So it's not just the face, but even looking at our names as being quote unquote foreign. And so I think that's one thing that we have to kind of try to untrain ourselves. And again, if you've thought that way, it's not too late. Like it's this process. And like I said, I think those of us in the Asian community have done it too. In fact, like my family has even referenced like, oh, Americans, like, the Americans, and that already is problematic even from our own community to say then that we're kind of othering ourselves and saying like, oh, Americans are not us, so even in our own language within our community, we have to be careful of like how we kind of describe ourselves, because we also feel like we're left out. And then you see it on kind of a visible level, which is why I think today and in a lot of the media has kind of brought to light that the fact that the Asian community, I think for so long, people think, oh, they're okay, they do well in school, oh, they have like a higher median income than your average American, they must be doing fine. but on another level, like that's not true, because there's a lot of Asian Americans that are not in that average,
That category.
that category. They are the working class. They are working minimum wage jobs. They're refugees who don't have the same advantages of those who speak English as a first language. So there's a lot of things that a lot of people don't realize. They just kind of lump us in all into the same category.
Yeah. And even that language part you mentioned, like that's another thing. Like, you're not American if you can't speak English perfectly, right?
And there's, and somebody who's European American, like, I have many friends, like our neighbor was Irish, and I mean, he has an accent, although he speaks English perfectly, but, our old neighbor had, and he was actually just the same, like, immigrant as my family. And then I think the other thing is visibility wise, like in the media and in, like you were mentioning, history books, in museums, even we're here, like a lot of times we just don't see the narrative of Asians, unless it's like overseas, like it's exotic. It's like, oh, it's from China, not that it's specifically Chinese American or Korean American or Cambodian American, Asian American, that it's exotic, and overseas.
And I would just summarize it with this is what the way I see how people perceive us is based on three things. It's what we see, it's what we're taught, and what we experience. And so, as Larissa was saying, like if we're not seeing ourselves in media, in news, in anything that we consume visually and even hear or read on a regular social level, then that affects how we interpret somebody's identity. If we're not learning about us in history, if you don't learn about Asian Americans in American history and all the contributions and all the different diaspora of Asians, not just the Chinese, not just Koreans, but all of them, and understand how much their contributions has affected American history, well, then that affects our perception. And then the third thing, I think probably the most important one, is our experiences. How often do we experience the other people? How often, if you talk about Black lives, within the Asian community, the perceptions between Black and Asians, like how often are Asians actually experiencing relationships with the Black community,
besides just transactional ones, like actual real relationships, right, and friendships.
And so the experiences that I would say, because we're about 6%, plus or minus a little bit, of the entire country. That means 94% of this country probably doesn't have many experiences with the Asian community. So then what's their perception going to be based on? It's going to be based on what they see on TV and what they actually don't learn in education or in their schools or in the history books or in anything. So
yeah, and of course, you were talking about the contributions, and why we're talking about things today is that some people initially are like, why are the Asians complaining? Nothing bad ever happens to them, and the fact is, like, what's been happening in the pandemic has been historically a pattern that's happened, is that the Asian American community has been scapegoated in the past for other ills. We were the original, like, they're taking our jobs people, like back in the 1800s when we came to work on the railroads, and there were riots, and there were massacres that we don't learn about in history books, where there was anti-Asian violence in Portland, in San Francisco, in Rock Springs, Wyoming. I mean, the list goes on, that there's been a lot of atrocities committed against Asians in America, and yet we don't learn about it. So if we don't learn about it, people are like, well, it never happened, right?
Or even the positive things, like, I mean, the typical thing we would say is, what makes you American? Well, I think one of the most common answers would be, well, if you're born here, then you're American. Well, then what was the Supreme Court, case that was so landmark that we all don't know about, with Wong Kim Ark, the Chinese American who was born here in the 1800s and fought to maintain that anyone here born here has birthright citizenship? We don't learn about that. And it was like, wow, every American should be very happy for Wong Kim Ark, right?
Yeah, every person that's born here, our daughter included, is an American citizen. So those are the types of things that I think are missing. And we'll let you, we can keep, we're going to keep talking. So we're going to let you ask another question, because we have so many other points we want to make.
We're going to forget you're here because we're just talking.
No, this is fantastic. Really, what I was going to, piggyback off of that is, in talking about membership and talking about confirming membership, and in learning more about American history, learning about our own history, I want to sort of scoot forward to, current day, current events, rise of Asian hate crimes, and also combining it with, the immigrant story that is featured in the documentary about sort of what is called, I guess, the American dream tax, the sort of toxic bargain that happens. Immigrants will come and accept and acknowledge that racism, discrimination, microaggressions, these harassments will just come part and parcel with immigration. But the idea is that then the American dream is sort of there at the end of the tunnel. I think we're at a time now where hopefully we're departing from that kind of a toxic bargain. And I wonder if you can offer maybe some current day, modern day toolkits, ways to provide support for our AAPA community, ways for allies to express their support.
Yeah, I mean, I think first thing is understanding, trying to get an understanding of what our community in general has had to go through our entire lives. And basically, when I say that, what I mean is like I like how you say it's like what you call the immigration tax or the coming here. So what did you call it? I forgot.
The American Dream
American
Tax.
Dream Tax. Yes. Yeah, so I mean, all my life, and I know through the lives of others before me and still today, it's put your head down. This country is great as long as you don't cause any waves. Doesn't matter what the problems are. Work through it. Don't talk about it. And that's kind of the reason why my father never talked about, him not having a father, and why we never talked about our past or what happened in the South, because it was told that whatever horrible things have happened in the past or continues to happen to you now, put your head down. And this whole concept of model minority is exactly that. Put your head down, be silent, and everything will be okay in the end. And I think for the rest of America to realize that has culminated to what is going on today. That is a big reason why we didn't raise our voices and have allowed things to happen today. It's partially our fault, as the Asian community, to be like, okay, let's just do that. Let's just be quiet. To accept that tax, as you call it, right? That's partially our fault, but it's also partially the responsibility of everyone else to realize that has been imposed on us, and that's what our community and our Asian community has put on ourselves because of the situation that our country has put us in. So
well, I mean, I think to that, to specifically speak on that, I would say from a practical standpoint, one thing that people that are watching, especially if you're not of Asian descent, can do is to be mindful that so many times we are left out of conversations in terms of influence and leadership. So again, people think like, oh, they're okay, they're doing well, they're doing great in school. But then if you start looking at boardrooms, and I think the statistic is the lowest percentage, is occupied by Asian Americans in corporate
decision
America,
makers, right?
Decision makers, and even in executive positions across the country. It's disproportionately like minute compared to, everybody props up the other statistics and you're like, yeah, but we're not in positions of influence and leadership, or our favorite one is also like, we start playing this game, with our daughter. She likes to guess who, like she's been learning about historical figures, and it's wonderful. We just came off of, African American History Month, and she's naming off all these, wonderful historic figures, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King. And again, that story still needs to be told more. Hasn't even been included enough, and so she can rattle off a lot of those. And so then it's like, okay, Harriet Tubman, all those. All right, name some Asian American prominent figures in US history. Crickets,
Not even crickets.
we don't have our narrative in there. I mean, we can name them off because we've been studying this. Wong Kim Ark. We can talk about Dr. Mabel Lee, who was also part of the women's suffrage movement. Larry Itliong, who was also part of the farm workers with Cesar Chavez. So we can name some of those because we've done the work and we've done the research. And so what we encourage people is to learn more about some of these historical figures. Dr. Erica Lee has written many books on Asian America. Dr. Gordon Chang, who's in our film, has also written several books. Jing Hong, who's in our film as well, wrote about the
Edge.
impact of the Chinese Exclusion Act, not just with Chinese families, but different Asian groups in America. And, on our website, fareastdeepsouth.com, we have a resource page, and we'll continue to populate that. I know several movements like Stop AAPI Hate has had many resources. And so we encourage people to seek out those resources. But more importantly, if you are in a position of decision making, or even if you're just a community member, if you have kids, you're part of schools, it's like, ask for these things to start to be included. In our case, we all learn about segregation. We all learn about the American South. So we're not necessarily saying like, let's devote a whole day just to learn about Asian American history. We would like to see, it's just like when we're discussing these topics that we're already learning in school, let's broaden the tent a little bit to include the conversations about Asians in America. We learn about World War II. So many Asian American Pacific Islanders served valiantly in World War II, not just World War II, in Vietnam and other wars as well. And so we just want to be included in the conversation.
Especially when they're significant, like 442nd, for example, we're talking about World War II, the most decorated, infantry, right, in American history were comprised of all Asian Americans, all Japanese Americans, mostly Japanese
Americans who were fighting for this country while
against Japan.
A lot of their families were incarcerated. So
showing the level of commitment to this country despite the discrimination that was against our people. Even during the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? Chinese Exclusion Act's happening. America hates Chinese, yet Chinese were the number one, the highest percentage population per capita to join the military, during World War II, even though there was a Chinese Exclusion Act that was in place because they wanted to prove their American citizenship, their American patriotism. So I think the education is going to be the biggest thing for the future to really understand how American we really are.
Yeah, but whatever sphere, as we mentioned, whatever sphere you're in, become an ally in that sphere. If it's business, if it's education, if it's media, there are ways that you can, again, include more Asian voices, opinions, mentorship, propping us up in leadership positions that maybe we've been absent from. We can go on, but we're gonna keep this conversation going. I know people might have questions as well, because, like I said, if you get us talking, we're gonna be
especially
on a roll.
her.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm not sure if it was mentioned before, but for people who are tuning in, please feel free to drop into the chat or the Q&A any questions at the end for Larissa and Baldwin. I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you were saying and just echo the lifelong journey, in a way, that I think allyship and support and self-knowledge and sort of support to others entails. I love the saying, you never really become a card-carrying ally. You have these moments of actions, of support, but then, the next day you get to do it all over again, or not. It's this lifelong process of service, and knowledge, and support. So I really love all of these options of education, collaboration, optimism, I think, also, and
Yes.
and getting to know people, and as you were saying, Larissa, not just transactional, but really getting to know people.
Yeah, and I think from some other
relational.
relational. I think some practical things that people can do is, there are several Asian American organizations, community-wide, throughout the country. And I'm sure in the Arkansas area, there are several, or even there might be a Korean American church or a Chinese, American church. Is like, people can partner, with one another. I think so many times, like we stay in our sides of the, of the corner of the room, and that we don't reach, across, maybe out of fear, or it's always like, it's like when you like somebody in school, where it's like, well, I didn't think they would like me. And then the other person does like you, and they think, well, I didn't think they would like me. And so it takes somebody to start that conversation.
Okay, now you're talking about how we met.
How we met, yeah, how we met. It takes somebody to start that conversation. And so, it sounds cliche, but it's like, but you be that change. Maybe there's that neighbor where you thought like, oh, well, maybe they are new immigrants. It's like, oh, you're kind of afraid they're going to be they're going to be put off or intimidated by you. And you're like, bake them a pie, bring it over. I mean, that's the thing, is food, I think, is a great diplomatic tool, right? Like
Yes.
food brings us
Food
together.
diplomacy.
Food diplomacy, I
Yeah.
think, is very, very important. And I think in this day and age too, I know that like we can be on social media, and we've been shut in our homes like the whole year. And as things are opening back up, even, with, again, safely socially distanced, let's go out on our lawns, invite somebody over for some dessert or some coffee, and just learn about each other's experiences. Because I think that's the thing that we don't do enough of, is we don't hear about his stories. And I understand like there's this call, like, it's up to people who are not Asian to learn about that and not like put all the pressure to like ask someone like us about all of American history, except for us. Like we don't mind talking about it, but we're not saying like that person needs to be don't ask like someone who's Asian to be the authority and tell you everything about Asians. Just
talk
ask
about
them
life.
about their own experience.
Talk
like
about
that's
life.
I think okay, like to say like,
What's
hey,
it
I want
like?
to hear about your story. What's your family background like? And then for you, again, everyone else can learn about Asian American history
And
through
find
research.
and find ways to identify with it. Oh, you did something like that too. Oh, same with us. This, and it might be a little different. It's okay that it's different. It doesn't have to be exact, but maybe find some commonality between someone's experience and your experience. Maybe it's the type of food. Maybe it's where you came from. Maybe it's a school you went to. Maybe it's a car you drive. Something is going to connect you together. There's got to be something.
Absolutely. And it reminds me just of the ways in which we are maybe hardwired to be on guard for differences. And how do we untrain that sort of sense of alarm or anxiety over profound or even superficial differences, whether those superficial differences are appearance or those more profound differences, maybe cultural differences coming from a different place. And so I think it harkens back to what you guys were talking about with regard to education and relationship building. Another thing that comes to mind, and this may be even more abstract of a question, is there has been a lot of pain and hurting and anger, obviously with everything that has happened historically, but also in the recent past. And so it brings to mind for me this issue of forgiveness. Yes. And I wondered if both of you could speak briefly on what forgiveness means for you, maybe modes of healing that have come up, I suppose, in the last year, ways to move forward.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yes.
We actually just talked about that on our podcast. We host a podcast called Love, Discovery, and Dim Sum. And, we were actually, our topic of the week was like, is calling out racism causing more racism? And that's kind of where we want to take this time to make people feel like that they're not on it, like they're not being attacked, because I think that's sometimes how it can feel, is like, you guys have been like racist against Asians like for so long,
And it's finally coming out, and it's all your fault.
But we don't want people to just keep, like, we don't want people to stay racist. I mean, not saying that everyone who's watching is racist. I'm just saying, like, we don't want the systemic racism.
Or even the microaggressions.
In the microaggressions, right? Like, we don't want people to keep having those. We don't want to have the same systems and the same things in place. Like, our hope in bringing these things to light is that people will change their perspective. And, I've been quoting this a lot, but this is going to be paraphrasing a little bit. Will Smith, the actor, who you all know, he's the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And he was asked recently about, how he dealt with racism being Black growing up in America. And, he said, like, most people are ignorant, not evil. And he says, like, ignorance you can educate. And so he had that optimism. It's like the majority of people, they may be ignorant, but you can educate them and then they'll no longer be ignorant. And so I think that's what we aim to do, is like, we are staying on the optimism side that, look, somebody can make a mistake. I think there's a difference that between somebody who is killing somebody or beating somebody with malicious intent for, just because of the color of their skin. And we've seen examples of that. And that's why everybody's angry, is because we've seen the blatant, cursing and racial slurs and the beating and the killing of people of Asian descent just because of the color of their skin or their ethnic origin. But there are a lot of people, like we said, that maybe made a bad Asian joke. I don't want to put them in the same category. Now, is that racist too? Yes, it's racist in nature, but it's not the same thing where we have to put them in jail for it. And so we definitely want to get to the point where let's have a dialogue. In fact, our friends at Media Action Network for Asian Americans, Gaioki, who I've known for a long time, he just had a conversation with Jay Leno.
Jay Leno, right? I was thinking
And
the
this
same
is
thing.
like the forgiveness aspect, right? Like Jay has finally asked, for forgiveness for some of his bad jokes he's made about Asians or like Koreans eating dog and
Yeah.
all that. And so they had a conversation, and even Guy is saying it's like, we hope he can be an ally now. You need to turn those enemies into allies and friends.
And it's funny because when I was reading that, I was thinking we've met him a couple of times, and
Jay Leno, he said
and
Happy Mother's Day to me.
yeah, and he was really, really nice. And every single time I never thought of him as the racist guy, right? But then when I think back about like, oh yeah, I do remember he made those jokes, but it was all for fun. But I think it's good. The whole part of forgiveness for me is what I'm thinking is, you think about everyone that has been successful in life. Everyone always says, I am only successful because I've failed so many times. Well, I think if you're going to jump back from failure in order to become successful, you need to be forgiven of your failures. And I think we're in a time where there's certainly a lot of failure on all people's parts. There's as far as racism goes or racial bias. We all need that type of forgiveness, and we all have to acknowledge that we failed. Even myself too. There's just things I've done in my past where I judged somebody, prematurely, and so we need to realize that those are failures. But the more failures we have, the more things we can learn, and the more things that we can correct, and we try not to make those failures. And when I teach my daughter, I've taught her, I tell her all the things that I've done wrong. It's like, hey, Daddy does things wrong still today, and whatever you're doing right now, I've done it. So this is a time to learn how to learn from those failures.
Yeah, and if we want to be the recipients of forgiveness, we also have to offer forgiveness.
Great point.
In a sense, again, I'm sure we have said things that have been inappropriate, that may have been racial in nature to our other friends, of different ethnic backgrounds. And so, we have to come at a place where we have to allow people to be able to fail and to make those mistakes. And so if people have been excluding, maybe subconsciously, Asians from conversations, from leadership positions, or maybe having a specific stereotype of our community, we have to allow them to be able to change that and become an ally. I mean, in our film, it's not in our film, but we had interviewed a pastor of a church
that's a good point.
in Mississippi, and he had grown up, he's white. He had grown up in the South, the segregated South. And he said, like, his family, that's what they were taught, was to just basically be hateful of anybody that wasn't white. And it wasn't until he, became a Christian and learned more about forgiveness that he actually really had a change of heart. And he realized, like, God made all of us equal. He made us all the same, and to be loved. And he was just saying, it's like, okay, that's when he realized, it's like, my parents were wrong. My family was wrong to hate Asians, to hate people that were Black. And so he ended up becoming the pastor of the Chinese church, at this church in Greenville, Mississippi. So he's a former racist, who became somebody who pastored a whole Chinese congregation. And so I think that's a testament that people can change. Because I think if we come to this conclusion that people can't change, and once a racist, always a racist,
then there's no hope.
then why are we having this conversation? Like, our conversations are being had so that we can make this country and this world less racist, right? That should be our goal, that everybody is treated equally. And so with that, we have to have these dialogues, and we have to be able to extend forgiveness and grace.
Yeah, and it comes down to also, like, do we want to be defined and also define people by their past, or do we want to define ourselves and people by their future, by what they're becoming? And I think, if we judge only people by their past, then there's only darkness in the past, right? You can only get better in the future. So let's reach towards the future and judge people by their potential rather than their past.
And that's not to say that people shouldn't have consequences for some of the things that they have said, but certainly we want to see progress. We're all works in progress, and hopefully, again, your greatest enemies will hopefully become your greatest allies.
Yeah.
And in that vein, I wonder, speaking again about the pandemic, which we're still in, so many of us have sort of made personal commitments to anti-racism, especially with the Black Lives Matter and the civil unrest from last summer. Can we take a moment, maybe Larissa and Baldwin, if it's not too personal, to ask to share your personal commitments that you've made in the recent past or, ongoing towards anti-racism?
Sure. I mean, obviously doing conversations like this. I think in the wake of the George Floyd unrest, especially, which again, when we heard about it, it wasn't news to us because we fortunately have had the blessings of having many rich friendships with a lot of friends from the Black community. And so we know that these issues have been, there the whole time. It's just like these Asian issues, if you actually have Asian friends, like, like this has been happening for a long time. It just hasn't been at the surface. But for us in our commitments as Asian Americans, we know that there is tension between and misunderstandings, I think, between the Black and the Asian community. And with our film, because we have the intersection of the stories, and we do show the interconnected and shared history between the Chinese and the Black community, which was actually a very respectful relationship back during segregation, even though it was during a very discriminatory period in history. We have taken kind of a different ownership in terms of helping to educate the Asian community about the Black experience. Because I think sometimes the Asian community doesn't feel a connection to the Black story and the Black history and even that discrimination. And they don't realize that it very much intersects historically, even though they just haven't learned about it. And so for us, that has been something that we've been committed to. And in fact, we've been doing several conversations with different Chinese churches, with Black churches, and trying to bring them together and having these, racial reconciliation conversations. And there are things that have not really traditionally happened because I think for a sector of the community, like that Black Lives Mattering to them didn't matter. Frankly. And so for us, we're hoping to help, our community kind of navigate through those conversations. And even, in what we're doing now, it's like, again, we're hoping to bridge those gaps because again, we understand it's like, sometimes it's like, oh, we don't really know how to talk to them, on both sides. Right. And so we're trying to bring people together through our film as a catalyst for conversation and for healing.
Yeah. And the only thing that I would add to that is the building of actual relationships. We see a lot of what I saw over the past year was a lot of people just becoming woke for the sake of becoming woke. And I would see these tweets from all these people that were like, yes, Black Lives Matter. And, but then I would be like, but you don't have any Black friends. You don't know anybody. You live in a place where there are no Black people, or you just don't go out. Like, who do you know? Right. And so, and that's not to say that that's necessarily bad. I mean, you might live in a place where there just really aren't any people of any specific color, or wherever you might be living. But being able to put yourself in a position, like, not just talking to your Black coworker or your white coworker about race, talking to them about regular stuff, like we talk about, like, what does it mean to actually have an honest relationship? It's being able to talk above race. It's being able to talk about daily things. How's school? How's life? How's your wife? How's your family? How's your car? Let's go grab a burger. Why do you like that burger? I can't handle spicy. Stuff like that, right? Normal everyday conversations that you would have, rather than I just want to talk about race because you happen to be of that other race.
Right. And I think the other thing is it's important to have a large sampling, like, like one person shouldn't be the representation. And I know some people are starting to put in questions, into the Q&A. And, I think one of the things that we've been having this conversation is, sometimes there's misperceptions or people will blanket, I think somebody just told you like, oh, all Asians are racist. And you're like, thank you. What do I do with that? It's like, well, how many Asians do you know? How do you really know, like, all Asians, are racist? Or, we'll hear people like, all people that are Black are racist against Asians, like the opposite, right? Like we'll hear, and it's like, well, like, where's that coming from? And part of it is the fact that I mean, I know for us, we have a large sampling, you know, like, so if something bad happens, like if we see somebody that's Black that attacks somebody that's Asian, like we don't automatically think like,
All
oh,
Black
all
people
Black people
attack
hate Asians,
right?
you know, that like, because we have a lot of friends who are Black that don't attack us. And so I think that's part of the issues. Or, you know, if somebody who is not Asian, if their only experience is like the Asian person who cheated them out of like $5 or like, you know, a deal or something, like they're gonna think like, well, you know, all Asians like
Do
are
that.
business cheaters, you know, like, you know, they're that's what they're going to think, or they're mean, like, you know,
Yeah.
because we do know there are some mean old ladies that are, you know, Asian, you know, they don't deserve to be beat up. Like, I'm not saying that, but you know, and they're mean to us too, you know, like,
I mean, I joke around about this because, you know, we're supposed to be good in math, right? But it's not transitive, you know, like transitive property equation. Just because the statistics say 70% of the attacks on Asians are by Black people doesn't mean that 70% of Black people are attacking Asian people, right? That math doesn't work. So we need to be better in our math and that, and just the way that we think, right? We need to understand that, okay, there were some bad apples, and those bad apples decided to take advantage of our people.
yeah. And I would also say regionally is also a very important thing. You know, I think how things are in Arkansas and Mississippi are different from the major cities, and we're seeing a lot of the major attacks happening in major cities, sadly. And this has also been historically true, is that a lot of the major dissent is against Asians has been in cities where we had higher concentrations. And I think this is because there's a perceived threat to the, you know, of economic power, threat of, you know, I guess educational power. You know, again, they're taking over our cities, they're taking our jobs, they're taking over our businesses, they're taking over our neighborhoods. And so I think that's when a lot of the anti-Asian sentiment tends to rise up, or to any group, you know, that's happened historically. Not to say that things aren't happening and attacks aren't happening in other cities or suburbs, because it, you know, it does happen in suburbs too. But, you know, we just had a conversation with our friends from Mississippi last week on a panel we did called Living Southern, and they're still in the Mississippi Delta. A few of the Chinese Americans we interviewed for our film, and we just were checking in on them, like, how are you doing? How are you perceiving everything? And they had a very different view, because, you know, we live in LA, and so we literally have friends and we've also been a victim of, you know, racial comments here in the multicultural, very progressive city of Los Angeles. And a friend of ours was, you know, almost had an attempted attack by somebody who was like wielding an axe. And so like these things are really happening. But, you know, our friends in Clarksdale, Mississippi and Cleveland, Mississippi are like, nope, we're not afraid for our lives. Like, you know, we don't have those same types of incidents here. And so, you know, we know that the fear is real, especially in the major cities, but at the same time, there are areas of the country where it's a very different story. I think part of that too is more of the smaller town, the smaller environment. I don't know how
And
things
maybe-
are in Arkansas, but
And maybe it's because of relationships. I always go back to relationships. When you're in a small town, you're not in a major city, you know pretty much everyone. You know, like our friend Eddie owns the one bowling alley, and everyone uses that bowling alley, right? So everybody knows everybody. So he might be one of the few Asian people, but everyone goes there to bowl.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the other thing is we have to do as a community, like for whether it's somebody white, somebody Black, as Asians, like we can't become that person that's like, I hate all white people and I hate all Black people now because of something that happened to our community, because then we're no better than that community, and then we're just perpetuating this vicious cycle. So, you know, going back to your point about forgiveness, I think that's the hardest thing to do, is to, you know, do that. But this is like also how I battle people like on social media who like say derogatory things to me or like, you know, like we've had people say to us, was like, you got to stop, like almost threaten us, like you've got to stop what you're doing. Like we did the Asian Americans Make History video that Moira was mentioning, where we give like Asian American history in 3 minutes, and we posted it on Facebook, and there was this troll that was just like, you've got to stop this. Like, this is like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you talking about this? Like, there's no need to talk about this. There's nothing bad happening to Asians. Stop doing this.
stop educating people about Asians.
And, you know, and I've had that exchange with people on social media too. And it's like, and what I'll do is like, rather like, well, you don't know anything. And like, you're just racist. Like, that's not what I say. What I say is like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. It's like, I think important, you know, I hope you can agree like education is important. And I hope you can agree that attacks on any person is wrong. Because that's the thing. It's like even like the Atlanta shooting, like people were like debating, right? Like, well, was it racially motivated or not? Well, 6 of the women that were killed were of Asian descent. You know, 3 of the businesses that he, the 3 of the whole 3 businesses that he,
We're Asian owned.
were that he targeted were Asian owned. Okay, that is a fact. Can we agree on those facts? Okay, at the end of the day, oh, is it better that he's not a racist, that he killed 8 people? You know what I mean? Like, can
It's
we
still
agree
bad.
that murder is still wrong? Like sometimes we have to just like accept that. Like, let's talk about whether this is right or wrong. Somebody's was attacked. If it was racially motivated or not, that's what we're debating. Can we say like somebody lost their life? Can we have that empathy? Somebody got hurt. Like let's at least agree on those facts alone.
Thank you so much. And we do have some questions, and I know we're short on time, so I don't know if this is going to be overly ambitious, but I'm going to go ahead and read the 3 questions that I see. And I think we've already kind of covered them, but maybe you guys can kind of pick and choose or kind of meld all 3.
Sure.
We have one question. How do you address views on the high rate of Black on Asian violent hate crimes, especially happening in San Francisco and New York? So we were just talking about this in terms of kind of the concentration of city, suburb versus rural kind of relationships, racial relationships. The second question is the specific reasons of AAPI hate. Can you give me your opinions besides we are the other? Do you think the reasons of racism are different for those against Blacks? And then the last question, one last one is, I have mixed feelings about when people ask me, quote, where are you from? A lot of Asian Americans get angry and mad, but I feel it is simply an honest, curious question, and we simply need to educate the inquirer that Asian Americans have been in this country a very long time, which is also something that we first started out with.
Yeah, I'll summarize my thoughts on all 3 of these questions. I think the reason why is because we're not looked at as American. The difference between us and the Black community is that the reason is the attacks on us is because we are not from here, we do not belong here, and we are not seen as Americans. And I believe that, you know, like when you're anti-Asian American, you're just really anti-American. But I think most people don't see it that way. They see it as, you know, this is anti-Asian hate.
We're anti-Chinese, or
Right.
you know,
We're
and again, it doesn't
anti-Chinese.
even matter if you're Thai or Korean or Cambodia as
Right.
these attacks. It's like they're like, we hate China. China is a power. They're trying to take over the world.
Right. But I am not China. I'm an American of Chinese descent, you know, just like you are an American of whatever descent you are. So I think that's the big difference, is that the reasons for the AAPI hate is because people aren't looking at them. They're not thinking, oh, that's an American person I'm going to attack right now because I don't like that American person. No, they're saying I'm going to attack that Asian person because I don't like Asia or elements of Asia or Asians, right?
Yeah. So I mean, whether it's the virus and in some of these attacks, like it's not just about the virus, right? It's about political, you know, the perceived political power of China and economic power. And then also there's also that model minority myth that keeps getting perpetuated in this country, where there is a sense of resentment. They feel like Asians are privileged because maybe that's been propped up as like, oh, they're more educated than us. They're more, you know, prosperous than us. They succeed at businesses. Like, how are they able to do that? You know, and so there, that I think is also what's building in the resentment, especially when we're dealing with the pandemic. But even though statistically, a lot of the AAPI community have actually been suffering greater economic losses during the pandemic than other ethnic groups. And again, people don't know that. It's this false perception that they have. And I think it also in terms of addressing some of these violent crimes that are being, you know, perpetuated by those of you know, that are African American, or in some cases, like it's saddened me to say there are people that are from the Latinx community that are perpetuating, again, people that are non-white that are perpetuating these crimes. And I think that again goes back to a localized issue where we have to work with allies from those communities. Because honestly, like us Asians telling people from the Black community, like, stop doing it, isn't really as effective as members of the Black community. Like when the NAACP, you know, posted, you know, solidarity with us, like that meant something because, you know, people listen to them. It's just like, we need, and LeBron James also has spoken out, or other, like, we need Oprah Winfrey and LeBron James and you know, Al Sharpton and all those people who they have been coming out to say, well, they have to start saying something and helping to educate their community on these racial, you know, these racial biases and differences, because us in the community can raise the awareness, but to truly transform that, it takes people from the community on the ground, not just the celebrities, because again, it's easy for celebrities to say something, but to people on the ground in the neighborhoods working to help make this change. And again, human relationships is in cross-cultural experiences. I actually think the best education, if we could actually afford to do this, is you have to send everybody like overseas to another culture to be immersed. Because I know personally, like I went on a missions trip to Mexico when I was in college, and it changed my worldview because I was one of those ignorant people who was like, why do so many people from Mexico come over here? And then I realized like why, when I worked with the migrant farm working community and the children there, and again, not all Mexicans have that same lifestyle, but I understood the ones who were coming over here for the work. I understood more like why they decided to risk their lives to come into this country, because of the conditions they were in over there. And I didn't have running water for 12 hours a day, and there were not paved roads everywhere I went, and many of the children that I saw didn't have shoes. And so like those are the types of things that I think as Americans, like we don't expose ourselves to other cultures and other people's situations that we could benefit from. But that's a really big program that's going to take a lot of money to send people like overseas. So at least within this multicultural America that we live in, you could at least go to Chinatown. You could go to, try a different
But
different
it all
section of
comes
the
back to
neighborhood.
talking about, going to those people and saying like, we're okay. So maybe you are here as a first time immigrant. Why did you come over here? Right. Then you can tell them, well, this is what I was running away from. There's so many people that have come up to me and say like, your community has not experienced the hardships of my community that have gone on for hundreds of years in this country. Right. I was like, well, there was stuff that was going on for hundreds of years in their country that's pretty bad too. And it would be probably good for all of us to understand where they're running away from in order to be in this country, to have the little that they have now. So it's understanding on both parts, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, part of it is people not asking, but also us not telling. I mean, there's so much generational trauma, and we see that in our film and through Baldwin's father's own immigrant story. People escaping war-torn countries, escaping famine, escaping so much, even genocide. I mean, there's so much that a lot of our Asian communities and other immigrant communities have fled from, why they've decided to come to the United States. And I think to have others understand that plight a little bit more will hopefully lead to more empathy.
And we have one last question from Frida Kwan. Hi, Frida. I'm a fan.
Oh.
I've seen you in the film. Yeah.
Frida Kwan was asking, what is the real message that Asians want the public to know? And if I can piggyback again in my overambitious style, if you can also include where people can get more info about Far East Deep South and follow you also.
Great. Why don't we start with the easy part? You can find out more information about Far East Deep South on our website, fareastdeepsouth.com. You can also follow us on social media. On Instagram, we're at Far East Deep South, and on Twitter, we are at Far East Deep So, because Twitter doesn't allow for us to put the UTH. And individually, you can also find our social media handles on the Far East Deep South pages. And in Frida Kwan, who asked that question, she's actually in our film. There are a lot
Southern Belle.
A
real Southern Belle.
I think one of the things that we in making our film, and why we framed our film the way we did, and why we're having these conversations, is again going back to that even Milton's question about when people ask us, where are you from, where are you really from, we really are trying to educate the American public to retrain their brains to not automatically think of somebody who is Asian as being foreign or not from here, that we are American. If you're in the US, I mean, if you're in China, obviously you can assume the person, is Chinese. I mean, even though we are Chinese ethnically, we are Americans, just like somebody who is German by heritage, but is born in the United States, you don't automatically think of them as like, oh, there's that German person. It's like, now they are considered quote unquote American. And I think we also want people to know that there have been issues, and there has been a history of discrimination and there has been a history of trauma, whether it's recent with refugees or historically in the case of Baldwin's family being impacted negatively by the Chinese Exclusion Act, or many of our friends whose families were incarcerated during World War II who were of Japanese descent. I mean, there has been real trauma in this country. And so this model minority myth that Asians are okay, nothing bad ever happens to them. I mean, we want people to know that a lot of the issues that we're bringing to light is because there's been long historical systemic racism in this country, to our community, that we don't necessarily want to just dwell in and say like, oh, we're victims, woe is me, but like acknowledging that, like that's whatever people like with any community, we just want people to acknowledge our pain. And so when people say like, oh, well, Asians never face any racism, Blacks don't face racism in America today, like that doesn't acknowledge that we have hurts and that we have things. So what we want to do is be able to acknowledge it, and then let's move from there. Okay, so what can we do about it? So, we don't want you to stay racist, and not that we're saying like everybody's racist who says like, oh, where are you from? Where are you really from? We're just saying everybody has some implicit bias and racial bias. And so acknowledging that and learning from it and changing your attitudes.
Yeah, one thing that we don't have in our film, but it's on our educational DVD. This extra part is when Mayor Daryl Johnson was saying how everyone in the South, and this is in his situation because it was the South we're talking about, everyone endured some sort of hardship. It was tough. It was a bad time, and yes, America has a dark history, but during that time, we all had to go through it, and we all went through it together. And so I hope that what that does is it shows the public, it shows everyone that there's commonality in our pain, there's commonality in our experiences. All our experiences are a little bit different from each other, so we're not monoliths, and that's a good thing. We don't.
Yeah, I think
right?
that's definitely another message that we want, is that somebody who's Chinese is different than somebody that's Korean American, like you are, Ergene, but also even generationally, like somebody that was born overseas from China, or even as a new immigrant, is different than those of us who were born in this country. It's like somebody who is again, going back to the German example, somebody that was born in Germany that's here as a new immigrant, and I have friends that are new immigrants that are German, very different than somebody who's like 5 generations deep as a German American. Very different outlook in life. And so we want people to kind of acknowledge that there are differences generationally. There are differences across the different diaspora, that we are not all the same, and to hopefully look at one another as individuals, as humans.
Yeah, and that there are enough commonalities between us that should unite us.
Larissa and Baldwin, thank you so much. This was such a rich conversation, and I truly enjoyed moderating it. I truly enjoyed watching the film. As I said, I cried the whole time. So I hope that folks tuning in will definitely tune in on April 8th for the screening of your documentary. Congratulations, and thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great meeting you.
Thank you so much.
And I want to say thank you, Ergene, for guiding us this afternoon. And on behalf of Crystal Bridges, thank you, Larissa and Baldwin, for that wonderful conversation. Just a reminder for guests, you can get your tickets and find out more information for the screening of the documentary on April 8th on our website, Crystal
And
Bridges.
it's live, right?
And it's live. Yeah. So that's, go to the calendar. So crystalbridges.org/calendar. And you can find out more information. Thank you everyone for joining us here. We hope to see you back again, and wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.